William and I are so grateful for the support we've received and have drawn great strength from all those who are helping us at this time.
William and Catherine shocked the world with news that swept through royal fans like a warm breeze. Baby number 4 is on the way, and the family is preparing to welcome its newest little heir. Their announcement was simple but powerful, a moment of pure joy that left millions imagining tiny hands, soft giggles, and new royal memories waiting to be made. Yet beneath the celebration lingered one question only time can answer. How will baby number 4 reshape the royal family forever? A father's heart at dawn. Long before the palace wakes, William wakes as a father. That morning the world was still dark when his eyes opened, the faint outline of the bedroom ceiling barely visible. Sleep had slipped away around 3 a.m., leaving him alone with his thoughts, quiet, gentle, and terrifying all at once. Catherine slept peacefully beside him, her breathing soft and steady. William moved with care, slipping out of bed so he wouldn't disturb her. In the adjoining study sat the letter, the one he'd read 3 times the night before. Yet his feet carried him back to it, as if the words might have somehow changed overnight. The doctors had been clear, certain. Catherine was expecting their 4th child. William lowered himself into the leather chair, the letter trembling in his hands. Another one, he breathed into the empty room. A smile flickered over his face, light fleeting, before worry gently pressed it aside. He rose and crossed to the window. Dawn was beginning its slow climb, brushing the sky with streaks of soft gold and sleepy purple. The palace grounds stretched into the distance, perfectly manicured, impossibly vast. Somewhere beyond those walls the world was stirring, ready to make its demands. Meetings. Appearances. Duties that couldn't be postponed or handed off. And now another baby. How would he balance it all? How could he be the father he wanted to be while the crown pulled at him from every direction? The thought circled his mind like a restless bird searching for a place to land. He already felt the ache of moments missed, bedtime stories postponed, school plays he slipped into late and left too early. The guilt was familiar, unwelcome, and sharp. "You'll make it work," he told himself quietly, using the same encouraging tone he used when George wrestled with difficult homework. "You always do." But beneath that determination, doubt whispered its darker questions. What if it was too much? What if this time he couldn't keep all the pieces together? What if he failed Catherine, the 3 children they already adored, and now this fragile new life just beginning? The crown was not a forgiving master. It wanted everything, and it didn't pause for the messy, beautiful chaos of worry pushed at the edges of William's thoughts, threatening to spill over, but something stronger rose in his chest. The same feeling he had experienced with each of his children. A fierce, protective love that made every title, every duty, every expectation feel small by comparison. Another child meant another heartbeat to protect. Another laugh to light the darkest days. Another tiny hand to steady him when the world felt too heavy. The letter crinkled softly in his grasp as he tightened his hold. Catherine would wake soon. And when she looked at him with those steady, knowing eyes that saw through every wall he tried to build, she would recognize everything he tried to hide. His excitement. His fear. His joy. His doubt. She always did. The question wasn't whether he could handle another child. It was whether he could find the courage to embrace this unexpected blessing with both hands, setting fear aside long enough to welcome a new chapter with the open heart he wished he always had. Could he be the father this new baby deserved, while still being the father his other 3 needed? The partner Catherine relied on. And the future king his country demanded? The sun broke over the horizon then, flooding the room in gentle gold. Somewhere in the palace he knew his children would be stirring soon. George reading quietly before breakfast. Charlotte, planning adventures with the determination of a general. Louis, wild-haired and bright-eyed, ready to conquer the morning with no patience for subtlety. And Catherine, his strong, steady Catherine, would wake to find the space beside her empty. She would know instantly that something had shifted. William looked down at the letter one final time before slipping it into his pocket. The months ahead would bring pressure, uncertainty, exhaustion, but also joy. The kind of pure, unfiltered joy that only accompanied new life. The real question, the one that quickened his heartbeat as he moved away from the window, was simple and terrifying. Could he find the right words to tell her? Because once he did, everything between them would change again. A mother's silent prayer. Later that afternoon, Catherine retreated to her private chambers, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely untrue. She was pregnant again. She pressed a hand to her stomach, still flat beneath soft fabric, searching for a feeling that wasn't there yet. Nothing physical confirmed it except the letter from the doctors and the quiet, unmistakable awareness born from 3 pregnancies before this one. Her body knew before her heart fully accepted it. Another baby, she whispered to the empty room. Tears pricked her eyes, joy, fear, or something in between. She couldn't tell. Anxiety crept in slowly, like cold water rising around her ankles. She walked to the window, catching her faint reflection in the glass. She already looked tired, and the journey hadn't even begun. How would she manage the exhaustion she knew was coming? "I can do this," she told herself. But the words felt thin, fragile. She thought of the complications lurking in the shadows of every pregnancy. She had been blessed before, 3 healthy children despite the hyperemesis that turned each pregnancy into a quiet battle. But what if this time was different? What if something went wrong? She was older now, and though the doctors reassured her, the voice of fear still whispered in the stillness. Catherine turned from the window and sank onto the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her face, caught between hope and worry in a moment too heavy to share just yet. Clip 3. The world expected her to be strong, composed, the perfect royal mother who never faltered, never showed weakness, never let the mask slip, but here alone she could feel the cracks forming. She thought of William and the way he had looked at her this morning, his eyes holding a question he hadn't yet asked. He knew. Of course he knew. They had been together long enough that words were often unnecessary. He had kissed her forehead with extra tenderness, lingered a moment longer than usual, his hand resting briefly on her waist as if already protecting the life growing there. "We'll tell him tonight," she murmured, imagining the conversation. William would be supportive, loving, protective, everything she wanted. But he would also worry, and she hated adding to the burden he already carried. The weight of future kingship sat heavy on his shoulders. And now there would be another child, another responsibility, another precious life depending on them to get everything right. The children. Catherine's heart clenched as she thought about how this news would change their world. George, who was just beginning to understand his place in the line of succession, who asked questions about duty and responsibility that made her chest ache. How would he feel about another sibling? Would he understand that love didn't divide but multiplied? Charlotte would probably demand to help with everything, her bossy little heart already organizing nurseries and baby clothes in her imagination. Catherine smiled despite her anxiety, picturing her daughter's face lighting up with excitement. Charlotte had been desperate for another baby in the family, had been asking for months when they might have one more. And Louis, her tender-hearted Louis, who still sometimes crawled into their bed at night, seeking comfort, would he feel displaced? Would he understand that he would always be her baby, even when there was a newer, smaller one to care for? Catherine stood and moved to her dressing table, studying her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared calm, collected every inch the future queen. But inside she was just Catherine, a mother who loved her children more than life itself and feared more than anything failing them. She touched her belly again, this time with more certainty. A 4th child, a 4th chance to experience the indescribable joy of holding a newborn in her arms. A 4th opportunity to watch a tiny human grow and learn and become whoever they were meant to be. The thought filled her with such fierce love that it pushed back the anxiety at least for a moment. "I will protect you," she promised the life inside her. "I will give you everything I have just like I have with your brothers and sister. I will be strong when I need to be, and I will ask for help when I cannot be. I will not let the world break us." The coming months stretched before her like an uncertain road. There would be morning sickness to hide during official engagements. There would be exhaustion that she would have to push through while smiling for cameras. There would be sleepless nights and aching backs and the constant pressure to appear effortless while her body worked the hardest miracle known to humanity. But there would also be William's hand on her stomach feeling for kicks. There would be the children's excitement as they prepared for their new sibling. There would be quiet moments of wonder as she felt life moving inside her, reminding her that despite everything, all the pressure, all the expectations, all the fear, she was doing the most important work in the world. Catherine straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. The woman in the mirror looked stronger now, more determined. She would need every ounce of that strength in the months ahead. She would need to balance vulnerability with the composed image the world demanded. She would need to be gentle with herself while also being fierce in protecting her growing child. The question that lingered as she prepared to face the rest of the day was both simple and impossibly complex. Could she navigate the treacherous waters of public pregnancy while keeping her family safe, united and whole? Could she be everything everyone wanted while still honoring the fragile? Prince George had always noticed things other people missed. Even at his young age, he carried the awareness of someone who understood eyes were always on him, even when he wished they weren't. And something in the palace felt different. He didn't know what. He just knew. At breakfast, he pushed his eggs around his plate, watching his parents exchange one of their quiet, coded glances. "Mommy?" he asked carefully, setting down his fork. "Are you feeling all right?" Catherine's eyes widened for just a heartbeat before softening into the gentle smile she saved only for her eldest. "I'm perfectly fine, darling. Why do you ask?" "You just seem." George paused, picking his words with the precision of a child who understood that words mattered. "Happy different. But also different." William coughed into his napkin. George caught the quick, loaded glance between his parents. They were hiding something. He was sure of it. Before anyone could answer, Charlotte burst into the dining room like a hurricane in slippers, hair flying everywhere. "George ate all the strawberry jam again," she declared, dramatically and inaccurately since she'd just arrived. "I did not." George protested, grateful for the distraction even as his mind kept working on the puzzle. Louis toddled in behind her, clutching his stuffed rabbit, already adorable and disheveled. He climbed into the chair beside George and immediately reached for the jam, proving Charlotte wrong, but creating a sticky disaster anyway. The tension melted into the usual morning chaos. But George kept noticing, kept watching, kept thinking. Later that morning, the three children sat in the playroom building an elaborate block castle while Charlotte and Louis argued over who would be the dragon. "I'm always the dragon," Charlotte insisted, hands on her hips. "George can be the king. And Louis, you're the baby dragon." "Why am I the baby?" Louis pouted, bottom lip trembling in his weaponized cuteness. George barely heard them. His hand stacked blocks on instinct while his mind drifted back to that strange, silent something hanging over the palace like charged air before rain. "What if," he said slowly, surprising even himself, "we had another person to play with? Another sibling?" Charlotte froze mid-argument. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know," George admitted, embarrassed now. "Just what if? Would that be good or bad?" "Good," Louis yelled instantly, thrilled at any new idea. Charlotte frowned, thinking it through with the seriousness of a general planning troop deployment. "Where would they sleep?" "My room is mine. They cannot have it." "They'd get their own room," George said, his imagination flickering to life. "A baby's room. Soft blankets. That mobile that played gentle music." The warm, powdery smell he somehow remembered from when Louis was tiny. A flutter of excitement passed through him. Another sibling meant another teammate. Another person who understood what it meant to grow up in this strange, glittering world. Maybe even a brother to share secrets with, or to teach things to the way no one had taught him. But underneath that excitement, there was something else. A quieter feeling. A tremor he didn't yet know how to name. A small, guilty knot twisted in George's stomach, one he wished he didn't feel, one he almost didn't want to admit existed. He was the oldest, the firstborn, the one destined to inherit responsibilities his siblings would never have to carry. That made him special, didn't it? But if a new baby arrived, would there still be space for him? Would his parents still sit at the edge of his bed when nightmares chased him awake? Would they still listen when he asked the big questions, why people stared, why their lives seemed so different from everyone else's? "George?" Charlotte's voice cut gently into his thoughts. "You look sad." "I'm not sad," he said too quickly. But Charlotte tilted her head in that sharp, knowing way, so much like their mother. "You are? Your mouth does that thing when you're upset." She pulled her own lips down in an exaggerated pout to demonstrate. Louis abandoned his blocks and wrapped tiny arms around George's waist, offering simple comfort in the pure, wordless way only the youngest could. The warmth of his brother pressed against him made George's eyes sting. "I'm fine," George murmured, hugging Louis close. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Charlotte asked, settling beside them with the tenacity of a detective determined to get the truth. George hesitated. How could he describe the whirlwind inside him, the tug of war between excitement and fear, hope and uncertainty? He was still a child himself, barely beginning to understand his place in a world that watched his every move. Now that world might be changing again. Just about changes, he said at last. Sometimes things change even when you're not ready. Charlotte nodded solemnly. Like when they took my favorite pink blanket away because they said I was too old for it. Something like that, George agreed, though he knew what he felt went far deeper than a missing blanket. They sat together in the playroom, building a castle that seemed smaller than the questions looming around them. George watched Charlotte, bold, clever Charlotte, and Louis, with his soft heart and sticky fingers, and a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over him. If another baby joined their family, he would protect them too. He would be the big brother they needed, even if it scared him. But the question lingered like morning fog. Would this new arrival fit seamlessly into their world, or shift everything they knew? A sister's brave heart. Princess Charlotte had inherited their mother's elegance and their father's resolve, but she carried something completely her own, a spark bright enough to light an entire room. She sat on her bedroom floor, cross-legged, her favorite dolls arranged in a perfect classroom before her. In her mind, she was the teacher, preparing her students for the most important lesson of their lives. Listen carefully, she instructed a threadbare teddy in the front row. When the baby comes, you must be very gentle. Babies cry a lot, but that doesn't mean they don't like you. It just means they can't talk yet. She lifted a doll and cradled it tenderly, mimicking the way she'd seen her mother hold Louis when he was tiny. Charlotte barely remembered those days, but she had studied the family photo albums like textbooks, learning how to support a baby's head, how to make soft shushing sounds, how to stay patient when they couldn't tell you what they needed. "I'll be the best big sister," she whispered to the pretend baby. "I'll teach you everything." She pictured it vividly, leading the new baby through the palace gardens, reading bedtime stories in a dozen silly voices, showing them how to smile when the cameras appeared and how to be brave when their voice felt small. She would teach them kindness, courage, and how to find magic in a world full of expectations. Charlotte's heart swelled with excitement. A new baby wasn't just a change, it was a new adventure. And she was ready. Charlotte drifted toward her bedroom window, pressing her fingertips lightly to the cool glass as she stared out over the palace grounds. Somewhere in this enormous maze of halls and rooms, her parents were going about their day. But she could feel it, something between them had shifted. Her mother carried a quiet glow lately, like a lantern she was protecting from the wind. Her father seemed lost in thought, even when pretending not to be. And last night, when Charlotte crept out for a glass of water, she'd heard them murmuring down the hallway. She hadn't caught the words, but she recognized the tone, excitement laced with worry, hope tangled with fear. She knew that feeling well. It was the same flutter she got when trying something new, unsure whether she would soar or stumble. They were going to have another baby. She was almost certain. The idea sent a thrill racing through her. She twirled in a circle, her nightgown flaring around her like a soft cloud. A new sibling. Someone else to love, to play with, to teach. She imagined them running through the gardens together, inventing games that only siblings could understand, whispering secrets when the grown-ups weren't looking. But then, just as quickly, the joy faltered. A small shadow crept into her chest, making her stop mid-spin. What if a new baby changed everything? Charlotte sank onto her bed, her thoughts suddenly heavy. She was the middle child, the only girl, the one who had carved out her own special place. George was the oldest, serious and steady, the future king. Louis was the baby, sweet and adored, everyone's little sunshine. And she was Charlotte. Bold. Creative. The girl their parents praised when she stood tall and brave during official events. But if a new baby arrived, would there still be room for her in that special space? Would her mother still brush her hair at night, telling stories from when Charlotte was tiny? Would her father still call her my little warrior and give her piggyback rides down long palace halls? "You're being silly," she whispered to herself. But the fear stayed, stubborn and tight. She pictured Louis, how much attention he still demanded. A newborn would need even more, feeding, changing, soothing at all hours. Her mother would be exhausted again, the way she sometimes got when responsibilities piled too high. Her father would be torn between royal duties and home, worrying constantly. Where would she fit into all that? Charlotte rose and crossed the room to her desk. Earlier, she'd been working on a drawing of their family holding hands, her parents at the center, George tall and straight beside them, Louis tiny and beaming on the other side, and she herself right in the middle, connecting everyone. She lifted her pencil. Should she add another figure, a small baby cradled in her mother's arms? Her hand trembled. Part of her longed to draw it immediately, to welcome the idea, to make it real and beautiful. But another part feared that once she added the baby to the picture, something would shift, not just on paper but inside her family in ways she couldn't control. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. She quickly set the drawing aside. Her mother appeared in the doorway, looking a little pale but smiling softly, an almost secret smile Charlotte had been noticing more and more. "Hello, darling," Catherine said, her voice gentle. "What are you up to?" Charlotte's heart hammered. The question she wanted to ask rose like a bubble in her throat. "Are you having a baby? Will everything change? Will you still love me just the same?" But the words stayed trapped, tangled in fear and uncertainty. "Just playing," she said instead, motioning to the dolls arranged neatly on the floor. Catherine walked in and sank onto the carpet beside her without a thought for her elegant dress. She picked up one of the dolls and examined it with exaggerated seriousness, as if it were the most important task in the world. And Charlotte felt her heart squeeze, because even in silence, her mother's presence was a comfort she wasn't ready to share with anyone new. Charlotte moved to her dolls, arranging them carefully on the floor. Her mother watched quietly, studying the little classroom with gentle seriousness. "This is quite an impressive setup," Catherine said softly. "What are you teaching them?" "How to be good with babies," Charlotte blurted before she could stop herself. The words spilled out, raw and honest. Her cheeks flushed as she realized she'd said too much, her suspicion now visible, the secret she'd been holding too tightly revealed. "That's a very important skill," Catherine said carefully. Her voice was calm, reassuring. "And you're already wonderful with Louis. He adores you, you know." "I want to be better," Charlotte admitted, her voice catching. "I want to be the kind of sister who helps, who doesn't get jealous, who isn't scared when things change." The confession hung between them, heavy and fragile. Charlotte wished she could take it back. She was supposed to be brave Charlotte, fearless and steady. But her mother didn't look disappointed. Instead, Catherine pulled her close, arms wrapping around her in the way that always made everything feel safe. "Being a good sister," her mother whispered, "doesn't mean never being scared. It means loving anyway, even when change feels big and overwhelming." Charlotte buried her face in Catherine's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of her mother's perfume. She wanted to ask the question that burned in her chest, the one that might explain everything, but the moment of being held, understood and safe felt more important than any answer. Would her courage and love be enough to embrace the changes ahead? Could she be the sister she dreamed of being? Or would sharing her parents' attention prove harder than she imagined? The smallest heart. Prince Louis moved through the palace world with the openness and trust of someone who had not yet learned to guard his heart. Hugs came easily, laughter spilled freely, and even small disappointments were met with wide-eyed curiosity. That morning, Louis had woken from a dream he couldn't remember, his chest tight with feelings too big for his little body. In his pajamas, he padded down the hall, dragging his stuffed rabbit behind him, seeking warmth, comfort, and familiar voices. Sunlight spilled across the sitting room, catching in Catherine's hair as she sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. She looked softer somehow, more fragile, more human than he remembered. "Mommy," Louis said in a tiny voice. Catherine turned and her entire face lit up. "Come here, my darling boy." Louis didn't hesitate. He ran into her lap, burrowing close as he had when he was even smaller. Her arms circled him, steady and warm, easing some of the tightness in his chest. "You're up early," she murmured, kissing the top of his head. Louis pressed his ear to her chest, listening to the familiar thump of her heartbeat, the sound that had always comforted him. But today, even that rhythm couldn't fully chase away the strange, restless feeling that lingered. "Did you have a bad dream?" Catherine asked softly. "I don't know," he admitted. He couldn't tell if it had been a dream or just a feeling, a shift in the world he couldn't explain. "It's all right," Catherine whispered, soothing his hair. "Everything's all right." But Louis wasn't sure he believed her. He had learned that adults often said everything's all right when it wasn't. He noticed the tension in his father's voice when he thought no one was listening, the careful movements of his mother as if she might break. Throughout the morning, Louis watched the household with sharper eyes than usual. Breakfast was quieter than normal. George pushed his food around, distracted, Charlotte chattered non-stop, filling the silence, and Louis nibbled his toast, unsettled. Later, in the playroom, Charlotte insisted on organizing all the toys by color, a plan that felt utterly wrong to Louis. He wanted to build a fort instead, a safe place where everything could be contained and protected. "No," he shouted, louder than he meant to. "My way." Charlotte's eyes widened. Louis almost never yelled. She softened immediately. "Louis, it's okay. We can play your game afterward," she said gently. But Louis couldn't calm himself. Tears streamed down his face, hot and uncontrolled. It wasn't about the toys or the fort. It was about the strange, heavy feeling that had settled in his chest. Everything felt different, and he didn't know why or how to make it right. George appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening?" "Louis is upset," Charlotte admitted, her voice losing its usual command. She looked uncertain, worried. Louis didn't know how to explain. He wasn't upset in the ordinary way. He was scared. Confused. He wanted things to go back to the way they were, safe, predictable, familiar. He wanted his mother to hold him forever. He wanted his father to promise that nothing would ever change. But he didn't have the words, so he cried harder, his small body shaking with emotions too big for him to understand. Catherine appeared, moving swiftly despite her careful, measured steps. She scooped Louis into her arms. He clung to her like a tiny monkey, desperate and fragile. "Shh, sweetheart," she murmured, swaying gently. "It's okay. You're okay. Don't leave," Louis sobbed into her shoulder. He didn't know why he said it just poured out, a raw instinct. "I'm right here," Catherine whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not leaving. I promise." Even as she held him, Louis felt something stirring, a presence he couldn't explain. His hand pressed against his mother's middle, and a strange, knowing thought passed through him. Someone else was coming. Someone new would need his mother's arms, his father's attention, his siblings' love. Someone who would change everything without even trying. Louis pulled back slightly to look at his mother's face. Her eyes were wet, and she smiled at him with tender certainty. "You'll always be my baby," she said softly. "Always, Louis. No matter what." But Louis remembered George and Charlotte talking about being the baby before him. He knew that positions could change, that someone new could alter everything. The afternoon passed with an unusual gentleness. His father lingered with him during story time, hand warm on his back, voice soft and patient. George let him win at games without pretending. Charlotte made him his favorite snack without being asked. Everyone seemed extra careful, extra attentive, almost as if they were preparing him, watching him like he might shatter at any moment. And the fear grew, because it meant they all knew something he didn't. That night, Louis refused to sleep in his own bed. He stood in his parents' doorway, rabbit clutched tight, tears threatening again. "Please," he whispered. They let him crawl between them. He lay there in the darkness, small and terrified, yet safe. His mother's hand found his, holding it gently. "There's going to be a change soon," she whispered, voice barely above the hush of night. "A good change. But change can feel scary sometimes, even when it's good." Louis didn't answer. He held her hand tighter, his other arm wrapped around his rabbit. He thought of the feeling he'd had earlier, the awareness of someone else out there, someone who would need his parents, his love, his care. Someone who might take his place. But lying there, surrounded by warmth and protection, another thought flickered through him. Maybe there was enough love to go around. Maybe being a big brother, like George and Charlotte were to him, wouldn't be so frightening after all. Maybe he could be the one who. Louis drifted into sleep, the soft comfort of his parents' presence around him. In the quiet darkness, his thoughts lingered on the question he couldn't yet put into words. Could he find his place in a family about to grow again? Would there still be room for his fears, his needs, his enormous feelings, now that someone even smaller and more vulnerable would arrive? Could he embrace the future without losing himself in it? Meanwhile, the palace evenings settled into a gentle hush. Outside, the garden terrace smelled of roses and fresh earth. Catherine wandered there, resting her hands lightly on the smooth stone balustrade, thoughts tumbling through her mind, unspoken, unshared. Behind her, familiar footsteps approached. William. She knew him without turning, his presence had always been a quiet, steady anchor. He came to stand beside her, their shoulders brushing, neither speaking at first. Silence, she realized, could sometimes hold more than words. I've been thinking, she murmured finally, voice barely above a whisper, about the kind of world we're bringing this baby into. William took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Complicated, he said gently, but also full of people who will love them fiercely. Catherine turned to face him, studying the subtle lines of worry etched deeper into his face over the years. You've been carrying this weight alone, haven't you? Wondering if we can manage, if we're enough. I've been thinking about it too, William replied softly, eyes meeting hers. Catherine smiled despite the tears threatening to spill. Every morning I wake up thinking about the nausea, the exhaustion, the months of pretending it's easy. And then I think of our three, George striving to be perfect, Charlotte burning so brightly she forgets to rest, Louis with his enormous heart, feeling everything deeply. Her voice trembled with the weight of love and worry. How could they give another child everything they deserved when they were already stretched so thin? William pulled her close and she leaned into him, letting his strength become her own. Do you remember what you told me when we found out about Louis? He asked. You said love isn't a pie that gets divided into smaller pieces. It grows, filling whatever space it needs. Catherine rested her head against his chest, the words sinking in. I was trying to convince myself as much as you, she admitted softly. Together, they stood in the fading light, imagining the life they would give their new child, imperfect, challenging, exhausting, and yet overflowing with love. And somewhere inside they knew, no matter how big their family grew, their hearts would grow too. Maybe, William agreed softly. But you were right. Look at us. We loved George with everything we had. Then Charlotte arrived and somehow we found even more love. And then Louis and still more we didn't know existed. Catherine pulled back, studying him. What are you most afraid of? The question hung between them, raw and honest. William's jaw tightened as he wrestled with the truth. That I'll fail them, he admitted quietly. That I'll be so consumed by duty I'll miss the moments that matter, that they'll grow up realizing their father was always somewhere else, doing something more important. Catherine's heart ached for him. You've never been somewhere else. Even when you're physically away, you're present in every decision, every lesson we teach them. They know you love them. They do? His voice cracked. Or do they just know I'm supposed to? She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. George asks for you when he's scared. Charlotte saves her best stories for bedtime with you. Louis falls asleep clutching your watch because it smells like you. They know, my love. They absolutely know. William closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his cheek. Catherine wiped it away gently. This strong man who carried so much yet showed so little of it, finally seemed unburdened. Tell me what you dream for this baby, she said softly, redirecting the moment from fear to hope. He opened his eyes, a spark in them. I dream that they'll know they're wanted, that even before they're born, they were already loved so completely it made us both terrified and grateful. I dream they'll laugh freely, cry when they need to, ask impossible questions. That they'll know their worth isn't tied to a title or position, but to who they are. Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest, pushing back days of anxiety. I want them to know their siblings as friends, not just family. To have George's kindness, Charlotte's creativity, and Louis's open heart as examples of who they might become. They'll teach each other, William continued, voice gaining strength. George will show responsibility, but also that it's okay to ask for help. Charlotte will teach boldness and imagination. And Louis will teach how to love without holding back. And we'll show them that marriage isn't perfect, Catherine added. But commitment means choosing each other, William finished. Even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. They stood together, darkness fully claiming the sky, stars beginning to pierce through like promises. Below them, the palace held 3 children sleeping peacefully, unaware of the conversation beneath the stars. Soon there would be 4 and their lives would shift and stretch to embrace the new soul. I'm ready, William said suddenly, surprising even himself. I'm ready to meet them, to love them, to figure it out as we go. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the certainty in his words settle like a blessing. We'll make mistakes, she said. Undoubtedly, he agreed, smiling. And there will be chaos constantly. But we'll do it together, she finished. Always together, William confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss to her forehead. As they stood wrapped in each other's arms, the question that had haunted them began to transform, from worry to wonder. How would this new life reshape their family? What unexpected joys would emerge from 4 children? What adventures awaited them in this next chapter? The answers would come in time, through sleepless nights and first smiles, sibling squabbles and tender moments, in the daily work of building a family that honored both duty and love. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them hand in hand, heart to heart, letting their love grow to fill the space their expanding family required.